But look, it's not just illicit drugs where cash transactions proliferate. Australia's illegal tobacco trade is said to be worth around $10 billion a year. It's spawned a crime spree across the nation and a clutch of new emboldened crime gangs. Even in the last few weeks, there have been a series of firebombing attacks on licensed premises in Melbourne, which is considered to be a new angle for crime gangs who have already muscled into the illicit tobacco markets. In the meantime, the state and federal governments continue to throw more money at crime fighting, which is all well and good, but the root cause of this crime, as we said a few weeks ago here, is that tobacco taxes especially are way, way too high. One who has come to that conclusion as well is a Liberal member for Monash, Mary Aldred, who in a past life is a former chief executive of the Franchise Council of Australia. She joins me now. Mary, many thanks for your time. Just give me a sense as to why you came to this notion that these tobacco taxes have to be brought down if we're to address the crime.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ross. I really came to this issue about 6 months ago when a little small business, the Longwarry-friendly grocery store in my electorate, was ram-raided, and since then I've taken a very keen interest. And the basic reality is until the federal government gets its head out of the sand and tackles the excise tax, we're not going to see any movement on the illegal crime gangs and terrorists profiting to the tune of $6.9 billion on this issue. Now, the government's all over the place. Late last year, Murray Watt said that there was no link between the excise tax and the black market. Now we've got the Assistant Customs Minister, Julian Hill, saying, quote, you have to be either deluded or lying not to acknowledge that link. So I'm pleased to see that, but now we need to see action. Since 2013, there's been a 282% increase in the tobacco excise tax, which is meant to act as a deterrent, right, to get people to, with a price point, to deter them from smoking. But what it's done is drive people to that black market. Worldwide, I think the illegal market's about 14%. In Australia, it's grown to 60%. You've got criminologists like James Martin saying it will go further, up to 95% of the market in Australia will end up being black market tobacco, and all of those proceeds are fueling fire bombs and ram raids. And the lost excise to the tune of about $10 billion is not going towards funding roads, schools and hospitals. So we've got to get real.
I think it's a really important thing that you make here, because you can hear what a health official would say if all of a sudden those excises were basically cut on those tobacco products. They'd be screaming, saying you're trying to encourage more people to smoke. But in reality, what you're saying right now is that, in fact, tobacco use, from what we're seeing from even the wastewater samples, tobacco usage is increasing in Australia, and that's not what we want.
No, it's not. I want to see smoking rates go down, and there's a very important report that's been released just yesterday, the wastewater report, which shows a 4% increase in nicotine in the wastewater across the country in 12 months. That's metro areas up, that's regional areas up. For the first time in 30 years, Western Australia has seen an uptick in their smoking rate. So this is just not working, Ross. And as you said, just putting in a law enforcement focus, that's welcome. But a couple of weeks ago, the federal government announced $84 million for the states and territories to be able to tackle this. Well, when you're dealing with $6.9 billion in profits going to organised crime, that's about $95 million a week in a year. That's in 1 week more than the entire federal government's announcement that they've made earlier this month. So that's a drop in the ocean. And you've got people like New South Wales Premier Chris Minns urging his federal Labor counterparts to get their head out of the sand and address the excise tax, because until we lower that, we're not going to see any progress on tackling organised crime and the black market that's going on here, as well as addressing smoking rates.
So addressing smoking rates is one thing. Addressing the organised crime has got to be the key. And the reality is, like, we're talking here about the use of cash in our society, and so that equals money laundering. Money laundering is clearly highly illegal. The organised gangs try to manage the amount of cash that's being thrown off both illicit drugs and also illicit tobacco sales. But then what you can see, as I pointed out in the introduction, is these emboldened criminal gangs now having a red-hot go go at the alcohol market and try to bring in more black market liquor from overseas and try to drive it through liquor and licensed establishments. So this is about criminality as much as anything else to try and wipe down on that. And you could start that very simply by reducing the excise on tobacco and competing with those illegal imports.
Absolutely, Ross. And Jim Chalmers has painted himself into a corner recently by saying he will not address the excise tax. Anthony Albanese doesn't want to know about it. And we're talking about seriously bad people involved in the black market here. As you said, bikie gangs, organised crime. Kazem Hamid, who is in an Iraqi jail at the moment, still possibly operating his crime gangs, is one of the AFP's #1 national security targets. Now, he's been involved in allegedly a number of fire bombings and ram raids in Melbourne, which is the crime capital of Australia, unfortunately, at the moment because of the state Labor government here. But he was also suspected of working with the Iranians on a fire bombing of a Melbourne synagogue. So the proceeds of this illegal market are going towards the funding of terrorist activities and really bad, very deeply concerning activities.
Which is the reason why, and again, you know, when we speak off the record with crime-fighting authorities, the AFP, Austrac and others, they are alarmed by the rise in these illicit activities. They're alarmed by the increase in the money laundering that's taking place. I mean, the worst example I've ever heard is 40-foot containers full of Australian cash basically being sent to China to be basically laundered there, and the proceeds end up coming back to Australia. I mean, when you see that there's that volume of cash coming through, you talked about the amount of money in the illicit tobacco trade. The $7 billion odd is just simply the money that the government is losing. That's how big the trade is. That's the amount of tax they're losing. It just gives you some sense of the amount of money that is in illicit hands in Australia. And that cannot be a good thing for a society.
No, it's not. And, you know, I speak to a lot of state and federal law enforcement people who are doing their very best job, but the federal government, it's like having one hand tied behind their back. They just don't have the resources to deal with what, you know, the fight that they're facing. We've got a Senate inquiry at the moment on illegal tobacco, and my co-chair of the Illegal Tobacco Task Force with the Coalition, Senator Richard Colbeck, is on that. And one of the submissions from Australian Border Force actually said that law enforcement alone won't combat this issue. So when law enforcement themselves are saying, you know, we've got to address broader issues here like the tobacco excise tax, I think the federal government and the Prime Minister really need to listen to them.
Mary, keep the fight going. There's no doubt it's a good one to have, and especially ahead of the federal budget. The Liberal member for Monash and also, as I say, the former Chief Executive of the Franchise Council of Australia. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Ross.